been strong, powerful, resilient, and hopeful about the future.
I believe that self-care is one of the single most important things that you can do for yourself. I'm teaching my children not only to love themselves and to embrace.
For many generations, Black women have been Black women have been strong, powerful, resilient, and hopeful about the future.
I believe that self-care is one of the single most important things that you can do for yourself. I'm teaching my children not only to love themselves and to embrace themselves, but also to take time out to find the things that make them happy, make them love, and to make them feel free every single day.
Today and every day, the Black Women's Health Imperative celebrates our diversity, our beauty, our magic, our confidence, our joy, our love of life, our love for family, and our love for each other. May we all be Black and well for generations to come.
Good afternoon. I'm Linda Goler Blount, President and CEO of the Black Women's Health Imperative, and welcome back to Black and Well TV. According to an article that appeared recently in The Atlantic, children are anxious and overwhelmed by the fear of COVID-19 and by the disruption it's caused in their lives. Some are stressed out due to lack of communication with friends and schoolmates and by missing some major milestones, prom, graduation. Others are terribly afraid of the police and for themselves and their parents after having watched the brutal murder of George Floyd and so many others. And at the same time, some children are adjusting and seem profoundly hopeful. Many parents are trying to figure out how to talk or not talk to their children about the shifts we're now living through. They're looking for strategies to help children process the images, the messages, and feelings with a sense of control and optimism. Facebook parent groups are full of suggested strategies, from shielding kids from the news altogether to encouraging older children to participate in protests. Physicians and psychologists are very concerned. Parents are stressed. Some are working from home, others are unemployed or underemployed and are fearful about what the future holds. Children feel the stress and anxiety of their parents. And while parents try to protect their children, they're having conversations they never anticipated before COVID-19 or the outrage over brutal policing. Children are asking questions about everything from mortality to family finances to police violence. Children see and notice a lot. So how do parents have these conversations? I'm really excited about today's episode. We've got a panel of dynamic women who will weigh in on what's working for them and provide you with some inspiration and advice on how to help your children understand and manage the stress they feel. First, we'll speak with adoption advocate and author Nefertiti Austin. Her latest book, Motherhood So White, a memoir of race, gender, and parenting in America, where she shares her journey to parenthood through adoption as a single Black woman. Then we'll speak with a mother-daughter duo, Eboni and Kyndal Coleman, activists from Villa Rica, Georgia, about how parents can support their children in the fight for justice. And after Eboni and Kyndal, we'll hear from Shiba Russell. She's an award-winning news anchor at NBC in Atlanta, a mom who shared her emotional story about how she and her daughter are coping. Shiba will talk about how parents can explain what their children are seeing in the media in a way that can provide them with a sense of peace. And finally, attorney, political consultant, and professor of law at Georgia State University, Mo Ivory, will join us. She's a political analyst on CNN and MSNBC, the mother of 6, and she's been on the front lines with protesters in Atlanta. Let's welcome our first guest, Nefertiti Austin.
Hi.
Hey, Nefertiti, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, thank you. So your book is titled Motherhood So White, a memoir of race, gender, and parenting in America. And in it, you share your journey as a single woman becoming an adoptive mother. What surprised you the most about the journey?
I think the first thing that surprised me was really the erasure of Black women in parenting literature. I was shocked. I shouldn't have been, but I was, that we were absent from the books, from magazines, from movies. I mean, you name it. It's like Black mothers just didn't exist. And then in the adoption arena, it tends to be pretty white. A lot of resources are geared towards transracial adoption. So there are resources certainly for all families who adopt, but in terms of, there seems to be definitely more emphasis placed upon white parents who adopt children of color, ironically. And so I just felt outside of this whole parenting genre, outside of the conversation. And so much of my early writing was really just sort of my upset at the fact that I didn't see myself anywhere. And that was really the beginning of writing about race and gender and adoption.
Are there any specific resources for Black adoptive parents?
There are blogs that are out there, but like with anything else, Black people have to comb through what white people have written and, you know, just sort of take it and figure it out for ourselves, go to our family members mostly. And so the resources at the time were definitely few and very far between. It seems like our stories were more anecdotal and we weren't given the breadth that you would find in, literature.
Mm-hmm. So you have two children,
Yes,
a son and a daughter?
I do.
And
Yes.
how old are they?
They are now 13 and 7. And so my son was 6 months when we met, and my daughter, she was also 6 months when we met. She came to us when she was 10 months old, and I got him when he was about 6.5 months old. So we're going on almost 14 years together.
That's great. I want to read a couple passages from the book that really sort of struck me, where you talk about Trayvon Martin's death and the impact it had on your parenting priorities, and you're actually preparing to take your 5-year-old son, August is his name, to a rally.
Yes.
So you say, I lived in an affluent neighborhood and ran with a highly educated, well-traveled crowd. I thought my privilege shielded me from the ugly truths about the actual worth of a Black life. Trayvon Martin's murder opened my eyes to the new reality Black mothers faced every day. There was no guarantee that our boys would arrive home safely from school or back from the store after purchasing Skittles. And you go on to say, Trayvon's death gave me another thing to worry about. Life. How could I protect my son? How could I give him the best life? One where he enjoyed a childhood of trains and dinosaurs, not rallies for the gone too soon. In my new skin as a mother of a Black boy, I had to think through how we would navigate a world set up to challenge his very existence. The task was daunting and made me feel powerless and small.
Yeah.
So I imagine many mothers feel that way, powerless and small. What do you say to them at this time?
Well, sadly, just in the wake of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, I felt that way again. And I was like, wow, I've just sort of kind of caught up with myself, 12, 13 years later. And so I think as a mother, of children, definitely of Black boys, what I would say and what I've said to myself is, I just take a deep breath and then I remind myself that Black people are strong and we will get through this, as we've gotten through so many things that have been thrown at us: enslavement, mass incarceration, drugs, you name it. We still manage to survive. And I think I kind of just dig into that resolve that we as a community have, and just trust that, we're going to make it through. I continue to talk to my children about race just to keep them emotionally strong and let them know that even though people may view them negatively, that they are beautiful and they are loved and that they are smart and that they deserve to have a good life.
So, when you're talking about the deaths of George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, so many others. You know, you've got a fairly wide age span between the children. You know, what do you say to a 13-year-old, and then what do you say to a 5-year-old?
So to my teen, we have really honest discussions. And I actually started talking to him about race when he was in kindergarten, and if not a little before. So he already knows the spiel. And so with my daughter, she is starting to ask more questions. So I think I enter discussions about race and about image and about how Black girls, and eventually she'll be a Black woman, how she will be perceived in the world, really through books. We read a book actually a couple of nights ago on Ruby Bridges, and she likes to dance. And so, you know, way before Misty Copeland, there was a woman in the 30s who couldn't get on because she was Black. And so we talk a lot about where we were, how far we've come, and some of the obstacles that are still before her. But I really reaffirm the fact that she should be proud of who she is and what she looks like, and her hair and all the things that go along with, you know, with being a girl. And I talked to both of them about time and about their history, and really educating them and making sure that they're armed with enough information so that if anyone ever challenges them about who they are, that they are well prepared to take care of themselves.
Yeah. So cities are, you know, contemplating opening schools in just over a month. It's not that far away. What are you most concerned about with the upcoming school year, and what do you think parents should be most concerned about?
I mean, you see it now. People are out and about. They're not wearing masks. I think that, you know, the weather has gotten better. People aren't taking it serious, and it is. I live in California. We've had a big upsurge in the last few days, and my concern is that when we return to school, that if the kids get to go on campus, that it won't last. That before we know it, we'll have, you know, in the blink of an eye, we're shut down yet again, and we will just be, you know, the emotional toll on families has been really significant. And I think all of us could benefit from some mental health counseling, just the depression and the isolation that people have felt, and the thought of having to go through that again with the children. You know, it's terrifying, and it makes me I encourage them now, since they can go outside and play, you know, to kind of enjoy themselves. But as I look towards the fall, I'm excited on the one hand. Yes, please go to school, please get out of my hair. But by the same token, I am concerned that if it shuts down again, their ability to process what they're going through physically, spiritually, and emotionally, it's just going to drag out for them. And I do worry what a year will look like, 5 years will look like for them.
Yeah. Well, Nefertiti Austin, author of Motherhood So White, a memoir of race, gender, and parenting in America. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and good luck this school year.
Thank you. I'm going to need it.
Next, I want to bring on mother and daughter Eboni and Kyndal Coleman. I think Kyndal is facing a new chapter in her life, which will be of particular interest to moms who are making this next transition. Welcome. How are you all doing?
Hi. Good. Thanks for having us.
Good. So, Kyndal, you are an inspiration to young women. You just graduated from Billerica High School. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Talk about what's next.
Well, thank you so much. Next, I'll be attending UGA in the fall. Go Dogs. And I'll be studying agricultural and applied economics.
Okay. You didn't want to pick something hard to do? You just...
Well, I just picked something that was kind of in line with what I liked, I guess.
No, that makes sense. So while in high school, you took a stand on injustice. So for the people who are watching, would you talk about what you did and what kind of response you got?
Well, I tried to organize a protest in Billerica, Georgia, which, if y'all don't know, is a really small country town. And I decided to do it because I saw what was going on in Atlanta I was watching the news every day, refreshing Twitter every day, and I wanted to get out there. And of course, it wasn't necessarily the safest place to be in. And I felt like contributing my voice to the crowd in Atlanta would have been great, but trying to spark up change in a place that really, really needs it was that much better.
So you were out with folks. Eboni, what did you think about that? What did you think about that, the idea and all that went into carrying out this protest?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud of Kyndal. Initially, when she came to her father and I, we both thought, this is probably not a good idea. But after discussing it and listening to her and really feeling the passion and understanding the concern that she had about what was going on in the world and, of course, locally, we just thought the best thing to do would be to support her in that endeavor. And so I think people really came out to support her. I think we were expecting more, but I believe that whoever showed up were the people who were supposed to be there. And so it was a good event. I was just really, really proud of her in that moment to see how she was making change here locally, and just the response that she received from people. A couple of her teachers, they spoke. We had a lawyer who attended and spoke to the crowd as well, who actually just ran for state court here. And so she really made some connections, and I really think provided a good start and foundation for us here locally in Villa Rica.
So for moms out there whose daughters may be saying, I've got to get out and protest, I've got to make my voice heard, what do you say to them?
As far as Kyndal is concerned, again, we felt like we just needed to support that. She's always been a strong-willed child, and we never want to stifle any of that ambition. We want our children to experience those things for themselves and to see what's beyond just here in Villa Rica. So I would say to any parent to support your child, have those honest, hard conversations with them. And at the end of the day, they are becoming their own person. And so my fears and my husband's fears, we cannot put that over onto Kyndal and her siblings. And she's a role model for her siblings. And so I would say to support that, have those real conversations, because we can't shelter them from everything that's going on in the world. And as a matter of fact, I feel like the more that they are exposed, the better they'll be equipped to handle it when they go beyond our doors here at home.
Well, speaking of going beyond the doors, you're going to be headed up to Athens, Georgia. And this fall, you get to vote in your first general election.
Yeah.
So what do you say, Kyndal, to those 18-year-olds out there who have the opportunity to vote for the first time, who might be wondering if it's even worth doing it?
I would say get out there and please go do it. I was at a point recently coming up in the primaries where I was like, I'm not going to vote. But that's just because personally my candidate was out, but I had devalued the influence that voting has on your community, on the country. And I know me and a lot of other young people want to spark up change. So we have to start somewhere. So do the easiest thing you can possibly do and please go vote.
All right. Well, thank you. You all heard it. Listen to Kyndal. Thank you, Eboni and Kyndal Coleman. Kyndal, good luck in school.
Thank you.
Go dogs.
Yeah, go dogs. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Yes, ma'am.
So our next guest is Shiba Russell, Morning Rush co-anchor on 11 Alive WXIA here in Atlanta. And Shiba recently, hey, how are you?
Hi.
I was going to say, you recently, you covered lots of tragic stories. I mean, you covered Sandy Hook Massacre and the tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, and a number of other really tragic circumstances. But you recently shared something really personal on air, and you talked about not being able to sleep and your 14-year-old daughter not being able to sleep. Could you tell us a little bit about sort of what was going on and how you both were feeling?
So my daughter is 15 now. She'll almost be 16. And I was just listening to Kyndal talk about going out there and being an advocate. And my dad likes to call my daughter a little revolutionary right now. So I'm with Kyndal and her mom, Eboni, right now. That's what's going on in our household as well. Mm-hmm. That week is the same week where I did get emotional on air when George Floyd died in police custody. And that was a trying week for all of us, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people have been able to go to work inside their own homes. I've had to go to work at the station every day. And so we have COVID impacting the Black community disproportionately, right? And then we have this man who was killed in front of all of us. And during news cycles like this, it becomes nonstop. You go to work, it's nonstop. You come home, it's nonstop. And, you know, I covered 9/11. That was the beginning of my career. And this is very different where now we have social media. And even when I get home, there's more pressure on me to make sure that the people who follow me are updated as to what's going on in the world. And that week with George Floyd, I feel like that week just got worse and worse and worse as far as how we were feeling as a nation. And we saw more protests pop up, right? And we saw Minneapolis on fire. And then here in Atlanta, the protest took a chaotic turn on that Friday night. So his death was on a Monday. We go all the way to Friday. It's no sleep all week. You know, it's in the thick of it at work and coming home and being in the thick of it with my daughter. And, you know, these teenagers are getting some really, I don't even know how to, the social media that they're seeing is way different from what we're seeing as adults. They're seeing a lot of posts with the N-word in it. They're getting a lot of pressure from their non-Black friends to just be okay with this kid just posting it and they're not really racist kind of thing and don't report them kind of thing. They're seeing a lot more than we're seeing. And so I'm dealing with trying to keep it together at work and then coming home and seeing what she's dealing with. So that Friday night, let me just get right to it here. So that Friday night in Atlanta, there was a huge protest over by the CNN building, over at Centennial Olympic Park. This is downtown Atlanta. There were thousands of people down there. And at some point it took a turn. It started out as peaceful and then it took a turn. And the people who were down at the protest were saying that other groups were coming in that were not, you know, associated with them. At the end of the night, you had a lot of fires. You had a lot of businesses looted. You had businesses broken into, that kind of thing. And, you know, my daughter wanted to go to that protest actually, but I was not able to go with her. So as I got home that Friday night, I usually try to either, disconnect from the news or whatever, but you couldn't disconnect that night.
Yeah.
And seeing our city on fire essentially had both of us rattled, had both of us glued to our phones. She told me that, you know, she tried to watch RuPaul's Drag Race. That is her escape through COVID. I mean, we've had fights on the couch about who can have the TV because she wants to watch this show. And she has said to me how important it is for her to watch the show and to get away and to, you know, it's her happy place. But then the next morning, both of us were up for hours and hours and hours watching everything that was going on in the news. By the time the next morning happened, that Saturday, and I was off, but not really off, Linda. You know, I'm still at home, glued to the coverage, pushing out things on social media. She comes into my room and she's in tears because she could not escape that Friday night into her normal escape show. It dawned on her that everything that was going on in the world, everything she was seeing about specifically our Black men feeling afraid of the police, that she now had to worry about her own father, who was a year younger than George Floyd. It finally clicked for her. And that was just heartbreaking for me to hear that from her, that she feared for her own father's safety. And never before had she even thought about that. You know, because these kids live in this happy land all the time, right? And most of them don't even watch the news.
Right.
But it clicked for her that something could happen to her dad. And that hurt me deeply.
It got really personal. You know, Shiba, you said something that I actually hadn't thought about. I was thinking about how the media is covering this.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's social media that teenagers have access to. As you said, we're not looking at this.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there could be another level of trauma coming through social media that they're consuming that we may not even see.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know, obviously, I'm not one of these people that says parents should monitor everything their children do. But
Yeah.
at this moment, I mean, is there a different kind of conversation parents should have with their teenagers in particular, given
Mm-hmm.
what you just said, you know, this horrible, hateful stuff, and then their friends say, oh, don't take it seriously. It really doesn't. Don't let that bother you.
Yeah.
Of course it bothers them.
I think, thankfully, because of this movement now, Linda, and this awakening, this awareness that the kids, you know, our Black children are more okay with it not being okay with the insensitive posts that they're seeing. It is okay to not sweep it under the rug. It is okay to report it. It is okay to make sure your friends know that this hurts them. There's a lot of N-word posts out there. It's disgusting, honestly. It's really disgusting. And you have to think about how these kids are being raised, that they think it's okay to put that out there. You know, I, as a journalist, can't keep exposing these kids because they're kids, right?
Right.
We see a lot of quote unquote Karens being exposed, but these are grown women. But you can't expose these kids. That's up to the kids. And I think, you know, someone pointed out some weeks ago, but this is the generation where their first president was Barack Obama. So this is a generation that has been raised to know that what's going on in the world, what we've all seen for generations, is not okay. And this has given them an opportunity, a real opportunity to stand up and be inspirations for us too. I'm inspired. I really am inspired by my own child. And that's why, I mean, even at work, you know, as we were navigating through that week, I anchor our morning show, right? I'm the news anchor for our morning show. I also am the captain of our show, the person who has to steer our conversations this way, that way. But in news, we for a long time have been told that we're not supposed to have an opinion, especially with local news, that we're supposed to remain objective. Mm-hmm. And so dealing with that throughout the week, you can feel the tide turning. And I've said this to management, and I've even said it to corporate. You can feel the tide turning as to what our viewers expect of us, that it is no longer okay to just sit there and be silent, because racism is not political. And this is what we had to explain to our bosses, that, yeah, it hasn't been okay to protest in the past, right? But now, where do we want to stand on the side of history now? And as I see my daughter go out and protest, she did a couple of protests, and I'm sitting here, you know, I didn't want her to go to the one in downtown Atlanta because it was much larger. I've been okay with her going to the local ones because I was not able to be there with her. Mm-hmm. But now myself and two of my other colleagues, we finally spoke up. It wasn't even an organized thing. It was just, we were all feeling so sad and hurt and angry, and that our hands were tied, essentially. And for me as a mom, I wanted to go out there with her. So we did finally speak up. And I'm so glad that we did, because as I look back at this time, I'm really proud of the fact that we spoke up and that our bosses listened. And now we are able to go out there. And I mean, we can't go to a defund the police rally, do you know what I mean? But yeah, we can go out there with our children, with our friends. Essentially, it has to be approved by our news director, each one. But we're gone are the days now that we have to just sit inside and be that, robot journalist, where this involves us.
Actually happening in the world.
Yeah, this involves us, and there's no side. There's no right or wrong side of this. You're either are you for or against racism? It's as simple as that. And So during this time, I've been able to have those conversations. What I've been struggling with at work, trying to navigate our team through these discussions, what's okay to say on air, what's not okay to say on air. And essentially our morning team is just, I've never worked with a group of people like this in my life. They are real human beings. They wear their heart on their sleeve. There's nothing fake about them at all. It is really hard for us to get through a time like this in our country and to not talk about it on our show, because that's the people that I'm working with on our show. And I think we've done a brilliant job with it, actually.
So have your daughter's friends asked her how she's doing? Are they checking in with her?
You know what? I haven't heard that from her. Are they checking with her? I've checked in with her, especially that week where we both were so emotional. I told her to go to bed early. This generation, they like to stay up all night. You know what I mean? And then they're just spinning and spinning and spinning. So I have told her to go to bed. You know, you need to go to bed and stop on your phone, that kind of thing. But I think they're checking in with each other as far as sharing positive posts. And I have allowed her to see some of her quarantine friends. So they're checking in with each other in person as well, and just trying to stay uplifted. And they're checking in with each other when they go to the rallies together. They're standing side by side with that and sharing their positive posts, their positive social media posts with each other. You know, after the second rally that my daughter went to, she says, you know, Mom, I could be out at the swimming pool. It's summertime for these kids, but they're choosing to stand up. They're choosing to stand up against police brutality. They're choosing to stand up against racism, systemic racism. I just couldn't be more proud of these kids. And I said even before the unrest that this particular generation, you guys are going to save the world. There's something quite special about them. I know I'm a parent of one, so I'm a little one-sided on this, but there is something really, truly special about them.
Yeah. And she will not regret having raised her voice in this when she's talking to her daughter about it sometime from now. Shiba Russell, thank you so much for sharing your story, sharing your daughter with us. And
thank
good
you,
luck to
Linda.
her.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.
Take care. And our last guest is Mo Ivory, professor of law and director of the Entertainment, Sports, and Media Law Initiative at Georgia State University College of Law. And while we're waiting for Mo to come on, hey, Mo. Hey.
Hi.
Something occurred to me that you may not remember, but you and I were in a march together. It was the National Women and Girls HIV Awareness Day 2 years ago in DC.
I totally remember.
Yeah, so always on the front lines.
Absolutely, I totally remember that. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for being here. So parents are anxious, you know, about what it holds, you know, financially, politically, and it's, you know, it's tough. How are you having the conversation with your children about not only what COVID-19 means, but about what the protests mean for their future?
So, you know, I think through the work that I do every day, this is not new conversations in my household. We didn't have to say, like, you know, let's get everybody to sit down and talk, because we talk about voting. And you know, a long time ago when Trayvon Martin was killed was when I first started going on television and started talking about, you know, police shootings as from a legal perspective, and then also as an advocate. So, you know, the kids in my house, I have one daughter of my own and 5 stepsons. And so 3 of the stepsons live in the house with us. And so we have, you know, a house full of Black men, my husband and 4 boys, and then my daughter, you know, who's in college. And so we've been having these conversations about the importance of voting and the importance, and they've seen the work that I've done. So we just convened during this COVID situation and just had more conversations about like how we were going to live and how we were going to protect ourselves. And then everything began to happen, and the fever pitch started. And I live in downtown Atlanta, so I'm kind of in the epicenter of it all. And the Wendy's where Rashard Brooks was killed is the Wendy's that we go to. And so when that came up, then there was even, you know, more conversation because the protests started coming down my street. The two officers that killed him were from the precinct only 3 blocks away from my house. So there's been protests at that precinct, precinct 3, just night after night after night. And so now it wasn't like, this is what's happening out there that I'm going to participate in. It's like, now it's at our front door, and now this is our Wendy's, and this is what's happening, and the helicopters are over our house. And so it became really, really real in a way that different from just having the conversations.
So you've got 5 stepsons. I mean, how are they? And yeah, what are they saying? I mean,
yeah, that is,
we're talking black women obviously have been killed by the police, but these policemen, like you said, are literally 3 blocks away. Mm-hmm. They probably have seen them.
Yeah, that is it. Like that heaviness that I just saw come over you when you were even just asking the question, you know what I mean? So that's it. It's like living with it every day and having the conversations. Like when you go outside, I need to know where you are. Like I need to have you, teenagers and even my college daughter are so like, I'll get where I get when I get there. And, you're begging them to tell you where they are. Are they home safe? They have their own cars, and now more than ever, it's so important to know where they really are and know that they could get caught up in something that seemed so outrageous, but it's just the same things we talk about, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, a police officer overdoing a situation, you being at a rally and getting arrested for something you didn't do. I mean, these things are real and they happen. And so I have the conversations with them about like how important it is, one from the legal perspective, because I'm a lawyer, and then also just from the perspective, like I'm a Black mom and my husband is the father of 5 sons, so we try to have those conversations, I mean, ad nauseum. And like, I find myself, feeling a heaviness all the time with like allowing them to express the rage that they feel, because there is a certain amount of rage, right? But just trying to keep them safe at the same time. So, we have those conversations, and then I'm in the business of advocacy, so we're always going to be having these conversations, and they're going to want to push the envelope a little bit more than say like a normal kid would, because I'm pushing the envelope a little bit more every day. So, we just have that kind of dialogue.
So, you're talking about advocacy, and what comes to mind is Tuesday, Louisville, city of 600,000+. There's 1 polling place for the primary. I applied numerous times to get an absentee ballot for the Georgia primary, never got one, so I had to go vote in person. But how do you explain what's happening? It's happening here in Georgia. It's happening across the South. This, what comes across as intent to keep certain people from voting.
I say it just like that. That's exactly what it is. And I think people need to understand that there's a plan in place to make sure that your vote doesn't count. And if you think that it's not, then why are they trying so hard not to get you to vote? I mean, if you saw those, did you see on the news, when Shiba was talking, I just kept thinking about like, how important it is for newscasters to have a sense of emotion towards this. And to, I always smile when I watch Shiba's show, because it has 3 Black people on the morning show. And then Crash, who I used to be on the radio with on V103 on the Ryan Cameron morning show. So I feel like I know that crew, even though I really don't know them, but it's so important to have that sense of understanding of what people are going through and that feeling, because it's really real. Like it can't be this thing that's all the way over here that doesn't affect you, like voter suppression. People like, oh, it doesn't affect me. No, it absolutely affects you, because Georgia just passed a hate crimes bill and everybody's jumping up and down of it, but it has a lot of problems. And voting is what would keep the bill the way it is, or have it change to what we need it to be, which is how many of the representatives are fighting for the bill in its correct form versus who isn't. So, I mean, whenever I talk to people who are just like, voting doesn't mean anything, I don't need to vote or whatever, I said, then why is somebody trying so hard to take it away from you? If it didn't matter, nobody would be fighting to take it away from you. So that scene in Kentucky where the people were banging on the doors, like, you you know that if you were in line by the time that a poll closes in Georgia, it's 7 o'clock. It was 6 o'clock in Kentucky. Then you still get to vote if you were in line when the time came. And they were actually saying everybody had to go home, voting was over. Can you imagine that? I mean, it's like an egregious violation of the law that almost equals like a poll tax. And like that you used to hear about back in the day that Black people had to pay in order to be able to vote, right? I mean,
they were counting on people not knowing the law.
Exactly. And that's still so prevalent today. And so what we saw in Tuesday during primary day, I want you to know, people go, well, why was it like that? Where are all these people working to get it done? We were working and gave them the plan for that not to happen. And the Republicans chose not to follow it. So all the work of organizations like Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight, all the work of the organizations that do voting rights advocacy, I think of Helen Butler at the People's Agenda, all of these groups that do this work did the work. And they decided not to take any of the precautions or do any of the things that they could have done to make it easier. So it is completely a plan to make sure that you don't vote.
So I want to shift slightly to school.
Yeah.
I know you're thinking about school also. At one point during the coverage of COVID-19, this is probably mid-April-ish, late April, the Secretary of State, Betsy DeVos, was talking about the potential impact of missed school on kids. And she suggested that students could just simply repeat the year. One county in Georgia has announced recently it's going to separate grades into groups and they're going to sort of stagger these grades. Certain grades will go to school on certain days. So one question is, what can our kids expect? But what do you want parents to do? I've not heard the workable solution yet. Certainly holding kids back a year doesn't strike me as the workable solution.
I mean, who do you think are going to be the kids that they hold back? I mean, come on, that's another form of education injustice right there. Mm-hmm. Because we don't, when an environment like COVID happens and we go to a homeschool situation, who are the ones that already have computers to be homeschooled? And who are the ones that have parents that are already in the home and maybe can easily transition their job from work, from going out of the home into home? It's not the people who are doing the service jobs, and it's not the people who are picking up garbage and doing those kind of jobs. So those students are still left at home to try to figure it out on their own from a borrowed computer from a school system who already has failing equipment. I mean, come on, like, we know exactly what that is, so that's another form of racism. Just hold them all back, right? Okay, so now you're one more year from not going to a college or a technical college or graduating from high school and learning a trade. So, I mean, it's an awful solution. She's an awful head of education, first of all, and it's an awful solution. And I haven't really heard one solution that she's ever come up with that's a valuable solution for our community. But that's because our community is not a focus for her. So I want for school systems to think about the most important ways that they can fix this situation and social distance it correctly and give services to the kids who really need it the most, which always are Black and brown children. And so if that means that the people who have resources stay at home and do homeschooling, then fine. And I hate to be so blunt, but that means white people and white students can stay home and can be homeschooled from home. And then Black students who don't have meals at home, that don't have adequate technology, come in and sit certain, desks away from each other and safely go to school. And if that means that they get to do that, then I don't see a reason why we can't implement a program as such.
I think you just made a case for voting for who sits on the school board as well.
And there you go. Like, the school board is who's making these decisions. So if you don't get involved in local politics, your city council person, your school board, all of your state senator, your representative in the House, if you don't do that, then these are where those decisions are being made.
Okay. Mo Ivory, Professor of Law, Director of Entertainment, Sports and Media Law Initiative at Georgia State University College of Law. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Take care.
Okay, you too.
Yeah, I think we just made the case for voting. On behalf of the Black Women's Health Imperative, I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode. If you haven't already, please take a moment to visit our website and coronavirus.bwhi.org, which we developed to provide information and other resources around COVID-19 just for you. And I want to thank my guests again, Nefertiti Austin, Eboni and Kyndal Coleman, Shiba Russell, and Mo Ivory. This week, the COVID-19 news got worse. First, pregnant women, we discovered, are at greater risk than we thought. They're more likely to be hospitalized and are at increased risk for being placed on ventilators than women who aren't pregnant. So obstetricians, please take note. But another headline grabbed our attention. The numbers of infections have risen sharply in 20 states. Yesterday, the US set a single-day record for numbers of reported cases, 40,000. But epidemiologists reported last Tuesday that the then current estimate of 20,000 cases a day may have been off by a factor of 10. Meaning that instead of 20,000 cases a day, the count is closer to 200,000 cases a day. So even with the updated numbers from yesterday, we are still reporting about 1/5 of the actual number. The first wave is not over. Even though we aren't getting an accurate count of total cases, and certainly not by race and ethnicity, we do see what is happening in hospitals. So there's some good news there. If we are anywhere near 200,000 new cases or new infections per day, that means that the case fatality rate is more like 1/10 or 1/5 of what we have been reporting. But that's overall. People with underlying conditions, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, conditions that may weaken their immune system are still at greater risk for infection and severe disease. Black people disproportionately are represented in that group. The percentage of Black people who die from COVID-19 may be as high as 5%. The US public health response has been abysmal. There are strategies that have been used forever that can reduce the number of infections and therefore deaths. Target a population, test the population, do contact tracing for that population, isolate those who need to be isolated. It takes an hour to train people to collect specimens for testing. It takes 15 minutes to train people to do contact tracing. We know where cases are occurring. We know the communities. Why not make testing available there? Why not train people who are known and respected in these communities, who value the people in these communities, to go there and test their community members and follow up with the contacts? And they can educate them while they're there on effective, practical ways to isolate if necessary and reinforce the need for proper hygiene, wearing a mask, staying physically distant. This has been done many, many times. It's not hard, and it certainly isn't rocket science. Ask your city, county, or state public health department where the cases are occurring, which communities are being hit hardest. Then ask why testing and tracing are not happening there. And then tell them it's not hard, and it certainly isn't rocket science. Thank you, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.